When we talked about trust in springtime, so we met in a workshop and said, what are we going to do as a focus theme? We did e-voting last year, and that was very narrow. And said, we want something broader. And everybody approached this with a couple of possible topics. And then, as I mentioned, Raphael showed up and said, let's do trust. And for me, I said, yeah, I had this in mind before, but I never really dared to bring it up because trust, that's so general. That's not very focused. That's not something you make a conference around. And having him present it or propose it was, yeah, cool. He has the idea, now I can accept it. That's very good. If I would have to push this would have been egoistic. And he immediately convinced President Bernard as well. So we kicked it off immediately. And it was a 5-minute conversation, and we were settled on that. And with that, 2 weeks afterwards, I moved. I went to San Francisco or Silicon Valley to attend the Usenix Enigma conference. And one of the first talks I heard there was Grzegorz Milka from Google, and he would talk about accounts at Google. And when you're coming from a small country like Switzerland, a lot of problems are handled, or account problems are handled by the local user help desk. And probably unemployed half the day, because it's not so much hassle, not so many accounts. But when you look at Google, all these small problems get an epic dimension at Google. So losing your account is such a frequent problem for Google that they've built huge processes around, because it happens in the hundreds of thousands, probably a million times a day. And they need many sophisticated processes to reestablish trust in the original user, the original owner of an account. And Grzegorz hit home with me with his talk at Usenix Enigma immediately, and he was the first presenter we contracted for this conference. Grzegorz, welcome.
Thank you, Christian. Thank you for having me. My team at Google builds systems and policies that prevent account takeovers. In this talk, we want to lift some of the veil on how we view this problem and what we do to defend against it. Whether our users realize it or not, our accounts are for hijackers a rich source of monetization opportunities, starting from financial information like bank accounts data, through personal data that can be used for blackmail, lists of our contacts that can be scammed or phished, to even our identity. When you, for example, work in accounting and your boss tells you in an email to send money somewhere else, would you double guess it? These monetization opportunities are significant enough that hijacking-related headlines appear in tech news from time to time. Major companies continue to be victims of serious data breaches, exposing billions of credentials in the process. But not only high-value targets are the victims here. Also, regular users are. In this TechCrunch article, the author describes how the hacker got into his Gmail account, logged the author out, and started scamming his friends. At Google, we want to protect all users from all kinds of threats. And in this talk, I'll focus on the perhaps most vulnerable form of online authentication, password authentication. What I'd like you to walk away with from this talk is that making password authentication secure in the modern environment requires a defense-in-depth system, one that takes into account the uncertainties that are behind each login. Let's first get an idea of how big the problem really is. The life cycle of hijacking begins with password theft, and there are three main ways this is done. Firstly, passwords can be obtained as a result of a data breach. Secondly, passwords can be stolen by malware. In our particular case, we care about keyloggers. And lastly, passwords can be phished. One particular thing all of these free sources have in common is that there are markets associated with them. Hackers want to sell stolen data to willing buyers. There's also a demand for easy-to-use keyloggers and easy-to-use phishing kits. These markets significantly lower the barrier of entry into the abuse world. There is no need for specialized computer knowledge in order to start hijacking gullible victims' accounts. But there's a silver lining here. Because there are markets, therefore we can track them. For example, in 2016, we have collected over 4,000 data breach dumps with over 3 billion credentials. This number is dangerous. This is because despite ongoing education campaigns, the password reuse rate remains high. Various estimates found in literature vary from 12 to even 43%. Our own internal estimate puts this number at 17%. Nowhere is the threat posed by the combination of the password reuse and the sheer volume of stolen passwords more visible than the number of valid Google passwords found in those dumps. So among those 2016 data breaches, there are over 67 million valid Google passwords. This means that if our password authentication was only about checking password correctness, there will be nothing stopping hijackers from getting into those accounts. We also monitored the 2 other data sources, and we have evidence that they led to exfiltration of at least 1 million credentials in case of keyloggers and 12 million credentials in case of phishers. Just like these 3 sources differ in volume, they also differ in their success rate. So compared to a general active Google account, if we additionally know that your username was in a data breach, then we estimate that it's at least 10 times more likely that your Gmail account will be hijacked. This number grows to 40 times in case your password was exfiltrated by a keylogger. And if you are phished, then it is 500 times more likely that your Google account will be taken over. The reason why phishing is so much more successful is that, as you'll see, we gather additional information on users' logins. Information that phishers are in a position and try to get. So, as you can see, the password theft ecosystem is thriving. There are tens, hundreds of thousands of credentials changing hands every day. In order to fight it, we engage the hijackers at every step of their way, starting before they even steal the password. For example, we warn users about suspicious content in Gmail. If the user clicks or types a phishing link, then safe browsing, Chrome's security effort may intervene and warn the user from providing details on such a website. Hijackers try to avoid these kind of filters. They use things like URL shorteners, utilize already hijacked accounts that have some trust ingrained in them. They even actively probe the machine learning systems that stand behind these protections and try to adapt to them. Whenever we find out that a user may be at risk or even had his password compromised, we notify them and force them to change the password. Otherwise, it will be circulating in this ecosystem up for grabs by anyone who wants to harm them. So the hijackers who have stolen the password need to sign in. With millions of stolen passwords out there, just accepting the password as it is risky. Ideally, users would use additional security measures like two-factor authentication. But the truth is, the adoption of such additional security measures is just not wide enough. Less than 10% of active Google users use second-factor authentication. Only 12% of Americans report using password managers. And this is just not enough. The reasons for this state of affairs are various. There are privacy and security implications of sharing your phone number with an online service, of storing your passwords in one place. But it's mostly about convenience. It's perceived as a hassle to set up additional security measures. There's also a real worry. What will happen if we lose our phone, for instance? Will we lose access to our own account? So there's a gap, a security gap between password-only authentication and two-factor authentication. In order to bridge this gap, we look at additional signals available to us at login time in order to determine the risk of the login. The signals that we look at can be grouped into two categories. The signals of how how unusual your login is, whether you're logging in from an unusual device, whether you're logging in from unusual time. To signals of how risky does the login look like. Does it match any known hijacking campaigns? Do we perhaps know that the user is high profile or at risk? And this risk assessment system has been at Google since 2011. And just like anything in security, there's a constant arms race here. Hijackers adapt. For instance, once we and other identity providers started using geolocation for risk assessment, hijackers took note. Nowadays, over 80% of phishing kits collect geo-related information. Hijackers have also learned to use proxies effectively, such that we had trouble detecting that they were using them. It was slowly becoming hijackers' favorite way of fooling our systems. And in the end, we had to significantly turn down its importance. Anyway, armed with the risk assessment, we decide whether we want to ask our users for additional verification. And these requests we call challenges. We challenge our users only when we believe that the login is risky. And we try to do it in such a way that we believe users should be able to solve. In effect, most of our password-only users are in a state that we call dynamic second-factor authentication. That is because they are not de facto enrolled into FA, but they may still have to provide some kind of second factor in order to log in, depending on the properties of the login. And this is the part of the system where the risk is most visible. Because depending on the action we take, we face two kinds of dangers. We can be too lenient. We can either let the hijacker in or offer a 2-week of a challenge, and the hijacker may get in and wreak havoc inside the account. On the other hand, we may be too strict and ask you for an SMS code when you don't have phone by you. And effectively, we can lock you out of your own account. In order to minimize the risk of our decision, we strive to build an arsenal of challenges so that we always have a suitable option at a given situation. I'd like to share with you some of the lessons learned from these challenges. Please keep in mind that while I'll be focusing on their weaknesses, the end goal here, the context here, is not to provide bulletproof security, but to provide usable service, to provide the best security, even for users that don't think about it at all. So the first challenge is secondary email verification. If you have a secondary email associated with your Google account, we may send a security code to that email in order to verify a login. What we have learned is that 10% of legitimate users have problems solving it. That is, they can't provide the code at the login time. This number shows how costly it is to actually challenge our users. We have to be really careful about whom, when, and how do we challenge. If we challenge incorrectly, we may lose a significant portion of our user base. Secondary email verification also has this problem that it's vulnerable to password reuse. So if your account is under attack because you reuse your passwords, it's highly likely that you also reuse it for the secondary email. And it's not uncommon for hijackers to try the same password on multiple services and use it as a stepping stone to other accounts. A notorious kind of challenge is SMS code. If you have a phone associated with your account, then instead of sending it to the email, we may send a code to your phone number. Like most challenges, this challenge is vulnerable to phishing in the sense that hijackers try to man in the middle of the code and try to phish it from the user. Phishing kits also try to get phone-related data. But what's more worrisome is that there are serious infrastructural weaknesses in the mobile phone system. There are multiple ways for hijackers to intercept the code, including social engineering. At its worst, hijackers could just call the customer service at the mobile carrier and, without any reasonable verification, ask them to clone the SIM card of the user, of the victim, using just the phone they have phished or got from a data breach. And more often than not, they succeed. In fact, that's what happened in the TechCrunch article that I mentioned earlier. The author had a two-factor authentication account, and even despite that, the hijackers got access to his SIM and got in. This problem is so bad that most successful hijackings of high value two-factor authentication accounts, so accounts that actually have to use second factor in order to log in, that most hijackings of these accounts involve breaking the SMS code. And make no mistake, this doesn't happen only to targeted attacks, where the hijacker comes in with a specific victim in mind. It also happens for opportunistic ones, where the hijacker just happened to get your password and perhaps even your phone number in a data breach. As for the volume of these kinds of attacks, in January 2016, we know that there were at least 2,500 SIM hijackings in the United States. Now, mobile phone operators don't like to share this kind of statistics, but we believe that this trend has only been increasing. Now, don't get me wrong. SMS has its weaknesses, but it still significantly increases the barrier of entry to the account. Nevertheless, we promote more secure challenges, like the Google prompt, where we ask you to confirm your login on your mobile device, whether it's Android or iPhone. Again, there's nothing stopping you from just clicking yes on your phone, even when you are not trying to log in and someone somewhere else tries to get into your account, and that happens. But this form of challenging is more flexible. We can present more data to the user about the login. We can also collect additional signals from the mobile phone. For example, we can collect the IP of the phone and compare it with the IP of the login attempt. Most hijackers get stopped at login, but some do get in. And when that happens, it's race against time. Because hijackers who get in come in with a prepared goal in mind. They have prepared scripts of what they want to do to get there. The goals vary, but usually revolves around monetization. They either want to steal your data, to use it for blackmail. They want to steal your contacts in order to horizontally spread, in order to perform scams. Some hijackers don't even care about your account at all. They just care about the fact that it's a Google account, so they can use it to perform in-product abuse, spamming, fake reviews, payment fraud. Because hijackers want to monetize, they need to perform specific actions. And that means we can monitor for this kind of suspicious behavior. And when we notice that something suspicious is going on, we notify the user, because the best defense is user noticing that something is going on and reacting. Unfortunately, this channel of communication is just too slow. So we rely instead on automatic machine learning systems that detect suspicious behavior. Consider, for example, a typical session that hijacker does in Gmail. When a hijacker logs in, he usually tries to delete all signs of break-in. And what often happens is hijackers delete the new device notification that you have sent to the user. Then the hijacker may export the contacts while he still has access in order to have a list of new victims. And he may perhaps send phishing links to those contacts and utilize the account they have just hijacked, because friends are going to, for example, see a marked in London email and believe it because it's going from a trusted account. Before the hijacker logs out, he may set up mail filters so that even when friends try to notify that something awry is going on, the user never finds out. This gives attacker more time to monetize, and may even give the hijacker a chance to get back into the account. So whenever our systems detect that something like this is going on, we block the account and require the user to provide additional verification in order to get back in. So that's it. With this, we have concluded the hijacking journey. I hope that you see now that there's a lot going on behind the Google login page. And it has to be in order to make Google Online Authentication safe. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do we have questions in the audience? Don't be shy.
Hello, thank you for a very interesting talk. Did you think about using biometric features like the way you type on the keyboard or something like this?
That's a very good question, and the answer is yes. We constantly spend time on thinking on what kind of usable and secure way we can find to authenticate our users. But the problem with such solutions is mostly privacy and trust. So, for example, there's this when you collect additional details for authentication purposes, there's this worry that we might infringe on users' privacy. For example, consider a social challenge, like Facebook did, that you could either identify your friends or contact your friends, right? When you do this kind of challenge, there's this leak of information on the user's social circle. And so this is, for example, one problem with biometrics, right? That there's this worry that this is the information that we shouldn't really get on our users. Sorry, yeah.
Okay. Additional questions? Yeah, there is one over there. Hold on, the mic is coming.
Thanks. How do you deal at Google with the user lockout situations?
Sorry, I couldn't understand. Could you?
How do you deal with user lockout situations?
So, so there's an account recovery process. When you notice that you are locked out, you can always you can select I don't remember your password, and you go through this process of us collecting the kind of information that you actually have. And we analyze this information, and what happens is you might, Yeah, so account recovery process follows a different rules, right? So unlike login, with account recovery process, you accept that it may take a few days for us to verify that it is indeed you that you are logging in. And if you actually have some information, additional information on you that you can provide to us, then you enter this kind of queue where you wait for us to give you back your account. At the same time, we notify the account in case it's hijacker that's trying to get in. And if nobody contradicts your account recovery attempt, we may give back your account. But that's also a good question. So it doesn't work always. It doesn't always work. So when you, for example, really you don't have anything on your account, you don't have access to your phone, you don't have access to your email, what do you do then, right? You get into this queue, and there are millions of requests every day to recover their accounts. So obviously, and most of them come from hijackers. So we have to prioritize. So we have manual reviews to verify such processes. But obviously, we can't do this for always, and there's for everyone. And what happens in some cases is that users get locked out for good. And when, unless you know a Googler who can vet for you on the Google page, what happens and what people complain about is that they get really locked out. So this is a good question because this is a real problem that we worry about. There's non-negligible number of users who are getting locked out because of our challenging system. And we are constantly working on decreasing that number of users.
Good. Thank you. Additional questions? There is one.
A lot of users also use their Google accounts for verification or account recovery for their other accounts. So if you realize Google account has been hacked, how do you work with the other big providers? Because they might be using it to recover their Apple password or other things.
Mm-hmm. That's a very good question. So one tactic I mentioned is hijackers using accounts as stepping stones into another. And this is, in fact, what we often see, that somebody's account at other identity providers get hijacked. The hijacker gets access to more data on the user, for example, access to secondary email, access to phone, various stuff. And that makes it much easier to log into Google or vice versa. So we are actually discussing this kind of exchange of information with other identity providers. There's a program called RISK that tries to develop a secure and privacy-aware protocol for exchanging this kind of information with Microsoft, with Facebook, where we, if we detect, for example, that somebody has been hijacked, and we know that this account is at Facebook, because, for example, it has the same username, we let them know, hey, this account may be at risk. But it's still very much in progress. It's not operational yet, but this is something we are looking forward to.
Good. Thank you very much. Oh, I need the chocolate. Thank you, Grzegorz, for your talk.
Ah.
Round of applause for Grzegorz.